Good morning. Welcome, folks. We'll just allow for just a couple more seconds for folks to start joining us. We have it.
Vamos a dar un par de minutos más para que se integren al webinar.
All right, we have a nice group joining us this morning, so it's exciting for everyone to be with here this morning. I'll just go ahead and introduce myself and then we can go ahead and get started. So welcome, I'm Deanna Chow. I'm the City of Menlo Park's Assistant Community Development Director. I am joined here this morning with a number of my colleagues here in the city and also our consultant team from the M Group. So again, thank you for joining us this morning and sharing part of your day with us. It's been about almost a year since we kicked off the housing element update. And so we are excited to be here at this point. The housing element is one of the City Council's priorities, and it will focus on three components. So the housing element, the safety element, and the city's new, the preparation of a new environmental justice element. And today's focus, though, will be on the housing element itself. We'll be providing a brief overcap of what we've done thus far, and then a discussion on our housing goals and our policy themes. And so we have here this morning, Calvin Chan, who's going to kick us off with some of our housekeeping items and then a few polling questions so that we get a better sense of who you are. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us.
Buenos días todos. Gracias por estar presentes.
This is the Housing Element Update Community Meeting, and today is February 12th, 2022.
Esta es la reunión de actualización del elemento de vivienda, reunión comunitaria. Hoy es 12 de febrero de 2022.
We're going to begin by going over some Zoom housekeeping items, just so everyone is familiar with how to use this application.
Vamos a comenzar indicándoles cómo usar la aplicación Zoom.
So as you can hear, we do have Spanish interpretation available for this meeting. And I'm going to go over the 2 steps to ensure that if that is of interest to you, you can participate in that.
Vamos a darle las instrucciones si gustan participar en esta webinar en español.
So step 1, to activate the interpretation, please find the world symbol at the bottom right of your control bar, which says interpretation, and click on that.
El primer paso es para activar la interpretación en español, debe buscar el símbolo de mundo en la parte inferior derecha de tu barra de control, interpretación, y dale clic.
Step 2 is to choose your preferred language.
El segundo paso es escoger su idioma de preferencia.
And if you have entered from your phone, please look for the 3 dots at the bottom of your mobile device and then find the world symbol to click.
Si ha ingresado desde el teléfono celular, debe buscar el símbolo de 3 puntos en la parte inferior del dispositivo y luego buscar el símbolo de mundo y darle clic.
Okay. And please remember, this is a community meeting where all voices can be heard. Please use respectful language and be considerate of different points of view. And thank you again for being here with us today.
Gracias de nuevo por estar presente. Esta es una reunión comunitaria y deben respetar el tiempo y hacer las preguntas de manera muy civil. Gracias. Comienza la interpretación en español.
Okay, we are going to begin the Spanish interpretation. So if you would like to switch to that channel, please do so now.
Pueden cambiar en este momento al canal en español. Gracias.
So we'd like to begin this meeting with several poll questions just to break the ice and welcome you all to this meeting and learn a bit more about you. So the first polling question we have is, how did you learn about this meeting? And I'm going to activate the poll now. Did you learn about this meeting from a city newsletter or announcement, from a friend or colleague, social media, or other? And if your response selection is other, feel free to type it into the chat so that we can record that. Give 5 more seconds to complete the poll. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. So it looks like a majority of people learned about this meeting from a friend or colleague, about half, and then secondly, from a city newsletter or announcement. Okay. Our second poll question. What is your relationship to Menlo Park? I live and work here. I live here, but do not work here. I work here, but do not live here. Or I neither live nor work here. Okay, we'll give a few more seconds for responses. And we have approximately 100 attendees with us today, and our participation rate for these polls is about 90%. So thank you everyone for participating. Okay, so it seems like the vast majority of people, approximately 60%, live and work in Menlo Park, followed by about a third of people that live here but do not work in Menlo Park. Thank you, everyone. We'll move on to our third poll question. How many housing element meetings have you attended? Is this your first meeting? Have you been to 1 or 2? Have you been to 3 or more meetings? Or you do not know at this time? Okay, we'll give about 5 more seconds for responses. So it seems about 3/4 of people, almost 75%, this is your very first housing element meeting. Welcome, we're very glad to have you here. Followed by some people, approximately 20% have been to 3 or more meetings. Welcome back, we're again very happy to have you here. So next, I'll turn it over to my colleague Asher Cohn with M Group, who will give an overview of the agenda and then walk us through a brief presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Cal. My name is Asher Cohn, and as he said, I'll be going through the first segment of this presentation. And I just wanted to begin by giving the agenda and discussing what we're going to go over today. So we're going to start with some background and go over some of the processes prior to this point. And then we're going to discuss housing opportunity sites. These are sites in the city which we've identified as potentially really suitable for housing. And we'll discuss land use strategies, which are ways in which we will be looking to get housing developed on these sites. And then my colleague Erin Tao is going to take over and discuss housing goals and policies. This is the policy framework that will connect these strategies to the sites and really move us forward in that way. And then we're going to have an open discussion, which another colleague, David Garcia, is going to lead. And then we're going to conclude with the next steps and talk about where we're going from here. So first, a bit of background. I just want to discuss what we've done so far, especially for the vast majority of you, which this seems to be your first meeting. So again, welcome. And we just want to see what we can do to get you back up to speed. We've had a lot of outreach so far. As you can see, this includes city council meetings, housing commission and planning commission meetings. There was a community survey, which is distributed to the community. We've had meetings with the community engagement and outreach committee, as well as community meetings. This is our fifth community-wide meeting. We've had several citywide mailers. We've spoken with focus groups, just specific organizations or social service groups within the city. We've had a presence on social media for the past several months. We've had pop-up events at the farmers markets and at some grocery stores in town, as well as Project Gallery at the 2 libraries in Menlo Park. And the website, which you see at the bottom of the screen, menlopark.org/housing element, has a lot of information on what we've done so far and where we're going from here. The three bedrock principles that we've taken really from the beginning since we began this project was to have a balanced community, to have a focus on housing affordability, as well as a social justice lens through which we're looking at housing in Menlo Park. So with these, the 7 months of outreach that I described and these three bedrock principles, what we did was we identified several sites throughout the city that we really went on a parcel by parcel basis for about 11,000 parcels in Menlo Park. And we identified the ones that we thought would be potentially very suitable for the sort of housing that affirms our three principles within the city. So these sites, we have them distributed primarily through Council Districts 2 through 5. The reason for this is Council District 1, that's the part of Menlo Park that's north of US 101, 2 through 5 are south of 101. Council District 1 includes several large residential projects that have been approved or under review. And since the vast majority of these ongoing or underway projects are there, a way to balance the community and to focus on affordability throughout Menlo Park was to focus our sites south of US 101. So you have a site map here of the city. You can see 101 comes up through here. There's a lot going on in this map. We're going to take it step by step, but for the housing opportunity sites, for this step, we're looking at the bright yellow parcels you can see distributed throughout the city. So these maps, I'm going to go through just some zoomed in. This is the southern end of the city, Sharon Heights. 11, for example, is the Sharon Heights Shopping Center, the Safeway is located. Going north from there, we have the downtown El Camino Real area. North from there, we have Middlefield, which goes across here, and then Willow, going from southwest to northeast. You can see on the screen. And finally, on the northmost set of our sites, US 101 goes here. This is Marsh Road. And as well as that series of parcels, there's number 38 is the school district owned parcel by Flood Park. And then 73 is on Pierce Road. So with those sites in mind, we're going to now discuss the land use strategy and how we're looking to use those sites to the city's best potential. The the broad overview of our land use strategy is we're setting up to 4,000 new housing units. This is an umbrella for the purposes of environmental review. We've begun the environmental review process in the very early going. We wanted to give an umbrella that's kind of a upmost estimate in order to say that we will know the environmental impacts of this happening. There may be, very well may be fewer than 4,000 new units as part of this planning process, but we wanted to put that as the umbrella under which we're studying. So our land use strategies, there are 6 that fall into 2 categories. There's 3 strategies that are to meet state requirements. These are the strategies that we're focusing on in order to build the units that, or to zone for and plan for the units that this state is allocating for the city of Menlo Park. And in addition to that, we also have 3 strategies for housing production. And this is about hitting those three principles that I discussed before of social justice, balanced community, and affordable housing, and going along the state allocation to also talk about meeting the principles of planning that we're using for this project. And I got a very polite reminder to slow down to help the Spanish translation. So thank you all in both languages for bearing with us as we get this all going underway. So the first strategy is to modify the affordable housing overlay. This is the AHO. And what we're potentially thinking about is for 100% affordable developments. These are developments that are entirely composed of affordable units, to increase the density bonus to 100 units per acre on the sites that are going to be 100% affordable. And this is a way to make 100% affordable projects more plausible within Menlo Park. And we're also discussing extending the AHO coverage area from its current area to then encompass all of the housing opportunity sites, the map that I showed a few slides ago. And we're also looking at modifying fee waivers and development standards. We've had a lot of discussion with affordable housing developers about how we can make affordable housing more plausible, more competitive in Menlo Park. And we're looking at ways to make these modifications in order to get more of these 100% affordable projects happening within the city. Another strategy is to rezone to allow residential uses. And this is for sites, several of the sites I showed currently do not allow residential use, but we're looking at allowing a maximum base density of at least 30 dwelling units per acre on some of the commercial sites within the city. And on these sites, we would maintain neighborhood serving commercial uses as a certain proportion, a certain percentage of the site. And this would allow us to have a mix of residential and non-residential uses on these sites. The third strategy under this meeting state requirement is to modify the below market rate requirements. Currently, there is an ordinance to say that projects of a certain number of housing units are required to, pardon me, having a visitor here coming onto your screen, are required to have a certain number of below market rate units as part of their larger development. We're looking to potentially increase that from 15 for projects, 20 more units. We might make that a larger percentage. And we're also looking at potentially increasing commercial in lieu fees for smaller developments that may not be required to go up to this 15%, but we are looking at ways to get more of this in lieu funding or to have more money in the affordable housing fund for the city. So next, we're talking about the land use strategies that are about helping support those principles and produce housing within the city. The first is for the El Camino Real downtown specific plan area, which you can see here in blue. Oop, sorry. Yeah, just click the mouse. So for this area, we're looking to remove the plan-wide residential development cap. There's currently a cap on how many residential units can be in this specific plan area. We're looking to lift that in order to produce more housing downtown. Also, we're looking to increase the base level density to at least 30 units per acre across all sub areas of the plan, as well as establish a minimum density floor of 20 units per acre across all sub areas. Looking to review development standards such as height and parking ratios in order to make housing development more feasible on these parcels, as well as potentially exploring residential development on city-owned parking plazas that are within the downtown area. The second area I'm going to discuss is the R3 zoning around downtown. And this is an area specified in the zoning ordinance. There's areas of R3, which is medium density within the city. These areas around downtown you see outlined in purple, and then the colored in parcels are parcels that are less than 10,000 square feet. 10,000 square feet is a little bit less than a quarter of an acre, just to give you a sense of what we're talking about. So go to the next slide. So for these, we're thinking about removing the minimum lot size requirements. So for R3, generally, they're allowed to go up to 30 units per acre. And the way the law is written now is that lots smaller than 10,000 square feet cannot go to 30 units per acre. We're looking to remove that limitation so the lots that are smaller than 10,000 square feet can then go up to 30 units per acre. Yeah, 10,000 square feet is about a quarter of an acre. And finally, the sixth strategy here is looking at creating opportunities for mixed-use development. On the left side of the screen is a commercial zone parcel in Sharon Heights. And the right side, most of this these zoning designations we're looking at are along Willow Road. You can see there's a few kind of off Willow Road, but this is the areas we're talking about for the next land use strategy. And for these, we're looking at those green parcels I just showed, allowing opportunities for mixed use development. And that would be in the districts you can see here: C2, C2A, C2B, C2S, C4, and P. So we're going back to this map I showed you to help kind of fill in what all of these different colors mean. We discussed the housing opportunity sites in yellow, as well as the specific plan in R3 and commercial areas. And this, overarching is how we're looking to get housing built on specific sites, as well as broadly throughout the city. I'm now going to turn over to my colleague, Erin Tao, to discuss the housing goals and policies and that framework. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Asher. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Erin Tao. I'm going to be going over some of the housing goals and policies that are currently in draft form right now. So the way that this section of the housing element is structured is we have several housing goals which provide overarching objectives around housing production. And then within the goals, there are several policies. These policies guide the approaches and the behaviors to help the city move towards those goals. And then going even deeper into this are the housing programs. And these are actionable steps that help implement the policies and help us accomplish the housing goals. So the overarching goal that's kind of leading everything under this effort is similar to what Asher said earlier. It's number one, to create a balanced community. 2, to focus on affordability. And then 3, to forward social justice and really address equity. So what we're working off of is right now in the current housing element, there are 4 existing goals. For this new update, we're proposing 7 goals. Some of them are being carried over from the existing housing element, but then we're also adding a couple new goals, including goals around equity and sustainability. So just a reminder that all of the goals and policies that I'm going to present on are for discussion purposes. They're in draft form, and we'd really like to hear feedback from all of you about things you like, things that you think need to be strengthened, or even things that you think that we haven't really addressed yet and need to talk about more. And so these goals and policies that we've developed for discussion were drawn from themes that we were developed through some of the stakeholder outreach, which included some meetings with the Housing Commission, Planning Commission, and City Council, as well as discussions with the community and conversations with affordable housing developers and social service providers. So jumping right into it, these first three goals, these are all goals that are currently in the existing housing element. The language is mostly all the same. So goal number one is about implementation responsibilities. And so this goal is about building internal city capacity to monitor and to respond to housing needs. The second goal is to equitably maintain, protect, and enhance existing housing in neighborhoods. This language was carried over from the existing housing element, but with the addition of the word equitably. So we really want to focus on looking at how we can really serve everyone in an equitable manner. And then goal number three is to provide housing for special needs populations that's coordinated with support services. And when we talk about special needs populations, we are looking specifically at people with disabilities or developmental disabilities, and then also people experiencing homelessness. These next four goals there's a couple new ones in here, and then also we've developed some of these based on existing goals, but I've kind of tailored them to make them more specific and targeted. So goal number four is to provide affordable housing and support the development of the diversity of housing types. Goal number five is a new one. This is to ensure equitable access to housing. Goal six is to implement sustainable and resilient housing development practices. And then goal seven is to ensure that we're creating processes that are very straightforward for developers, but also emphasize well-designed new housing so that new housing that is produced is kind of in line with meeting the needs of the community and then also being of high quality design. So I'm going to dive a little deeper into each of the goals and some of the policies, draft policies under them. So goal number one, like I mentioned before, this is largely carried over from the existing housing element. So a lot of the policies under it have stayed the same. Some of the policies under this are ensuring that Menlo Park continues participation with regional housing collaboratives and working with housing agencies and nonprofits to meet housing goals. There's also some policies under this one that direct the city to develop funding sources and continue funding affordable housing projects, as well as utilizing state and federal funding to support additional housing. Some new policy language under this goal, though, is the addition of ensuring and looking into expanding staff capacity to monitor progress on housing goals, specifically for affordable housing. Goal number two, which was to maintain and protect existing housing in neighborhoods. This one is again largely carried over from the existing housing element, and a lot of the policies we have under this are just brought over pretty much very similar language to what's currently in the housing element. Some of the policies under this one are to maintain, rehabilitate, and preserve existing housing, and then also protect affordable housing through funding and strategies such as deed restrictions. Goal three is to really meet the needs of special needs populations. And some of the policies are carried over from the existing housing element, but we also have several new ones specifically focused at really meeting the needs of people with disabilities and developmental disabilities. So some of the policies underneath this one are working with service providers to connect human services to affordable housing for people with special needs. There's also several new policies under this that are about providing incentives for special needs housing and also promoting accessible, transitional, and supportive housing. We also have a policy under this goal about working with nonprofits to address housing for people experiencing homelessness and trying to think more creatively about how to provide solutions to meet their needs. Goal 4 is about providing affordable housing and looking at how we can provide different housing types that meets people's needs of all income levels. This also has several new policies as well as adjustments to what's currently in the housing element. Some of the policies underneath this one are providing incentives for 100% affordable housing developments, and then also considering streamlined review for these projects. We also have a policy under this goal about making adjustments to the affordable housing overlay, which is one of the city's current zoning tools to sort of incentivize affordable housing. So we're looking at how we can make these incentives even more preferable for developers. One of the other things we're considering is allowing residential uses in areas that are currently only allow commercial or non-residential. We're also looking at considerations for increasing the below market rate inclusionary requirement and also increasing in lieu fees. And then one more thing that we have under this goal is considerations for modifying development standards, particularly for affordable housing, such as parking. And that's just to help make it a little bit easier to build housing. Goal 5, this is a new one. Some of the policies were carried over from other parts of the housing element, but we've also added some new ones based on conversations with the community and with service providers. So some of the big policies under this one is creating holistic opportunities for community participation on housing policies and future implementation. And then also looking at how we can expand opportunities for home ownership, particularly for lower income households and people who are going to be first-time homeowners. There's also several policies here where we're really looking at how we can expand support for tenants. So there's some policies about providing financial and programmatic support for renters. And then one thing that we would really like to hear some of your feedback on are several suggestions made by the Housing Commission. The Housing Commission had suggested several new policies that we think would be great to talk more about. So for example, one of the policies that was suggested is the just cause eviction ordinance. What this is that it prohibits a landlord from evicting a tenant without just cause. Another suggestion by the Housing Commission was putting in rent caps. Rent caps are a form of rent control, and that's to prevent jumps in rent prices. And this would be above what is required by the state of California. Fair chance ordinances is another thing that was suggested. What this is it prohibits landlords from doing criminal background checks and using criminal history as a factor when selecting tenants. And then the last suggestion was considerations for a citywide rental registry. What that is a method for tracking rental costs, and that would require landlords to report how much rent they're charging. So it could be a very good method for looking at how what the rent trends are in the city, but it would require landlords to report on this and then additional staff time to manage that registry. And then the sixth goal is on sustainable housing. This is also a new goal with some policies carried over, but also additional new policies added in. The policies under this section are largely about encouraging renewable energy and conservation. There's also a policy about providing emergency housing assistance to the county and nonprofits that provide disaster preparedness services and emergency shelters. There's also some policies under this one about promoting resilient design, and resilient design are just ways that we can manipulate the built environment to make them more prepared for future disasters or climate change. So for example, requiring high efficiency air conditioning with air filtration systems to sort of make sure that new buildings are prepared for climate events such as wildfires or wildfire smoke. And then the last goal is focused on the design of housing. So a lot of these policies were taken from the current housing element. These policies are largely around developing housing and design standards and then streamlining procedures for well-designed housing. And so the intent of this is just to make it easier and faster for affordable housing developers to get their projects approved. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to David, who's going to help facilitate a discussion and really get some of your thoughts on everything that's been presented so far. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining. My name is David Garcia, and we really appreciate all the information that we just heard from Asher and Aaron. And now we get to hear from you all. So this is really the most exciting part of today's presentation. So to get our minds rolling, we're going to hold 2 poll questions, and then we'll talk about some specifics for how we're going to run this discussion. We can get the next slide, please.
Thanks, David. So we'll have 2 poll questions. Our 4th poll question is, what is your primary area of interest? Is it housing equity, housing for special populations, housing sustainability and design, housing affordability, or other? And if you choose other, please feel free to input into the chat what your selection would be. We'll give another 5 seconds for responses. Okay, so it seems like a majority of respondents say that their primary area of interest is not one of the ones listed here. And we do see in our chat log a variety of different responses, and rest assured they are being collected and the project team will be reviewing them following this meeting. The second highest response would be sustainability and design, with about 1/5 of people. Okay, let's go on to our last poll question. What area should see more focus in this housing element cycle? Is it housing equity, housing for special populations, sustainability and design, housing affordability, or other? And again, if you select other, please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. We'll give another 5 seconds for answers. Thank you everyone for participating. So it seems like, again, the majority of folks respond that their primary focus is something other than listed on this screen, which is absolutely fine. And thank you for inputting into the chat your responses. We really welcome your feedback and thank you for participating. Okay, I'll stop sharing this and turn it back to David.
Okay, thank you so much. So we want to frame this discussion. We've already had a lot of great questions come in our through the option to submit a question, and we've had a lot of input in the chat so far. So we really want to focus on our discussion on the goals, policies, and programs. We do have a big topic of the sites, so we'll definitely be considering those as well. But really focusing on our goals, policies, and programs. We're going to use a couple of different tools. So we do have many different windows open on our computers. We're going to use an interactive whiteboard to be capturing feedback in real time. And we're also going to be asked people to use the raise hand function to speak if you want to provide your question or comment live, as well as we're taking questions in the chat, in the question and answer feature as well. And so we're going to do a quick review of how to raise your hand in the next slide. So on your desktop, remember if you go down to the bottom of your screen to the button highlighted here, and on your phones as well. Okay. And great. So we're going to begin first by, I think, if we can address some of the input that we've gotten so far in the chat and give us space to some of the big themes that have been coming out. And we do have some hands raising up as well. But before we jump into that, we have a couple of big picture questions that were thrown out earlier, which were one really great question from Angela, which was on kind of the big picture of these goals. How were these really selected among all the priorities that the community was coming up with? And how has the impact been evaluated? What's been coming out? So if someone from the team would like to answer that before we hand the mic over to our 3 hands up and start going through some other questions.
Erin, do you want to speak to the policy development process?
Yeah, sure. So part of how we came up with some of these draft policies and goals was we relied heavily on the current, what's in the current housing element. And then, sorry, I just realized my camera was not on. Sorry. So we relied heavily on what was in the current housing element. And then we also kind of added to this based on some of our conversations with service providers. So for example, we heard a lot about the communities with people with disabilities. And so we added policies that kind of addressed what was identified as a need by service providers. There were some that were also developed based on past community meetings that we've had. And then also, we're still in the process of working with staff to sort of refine these. And this community meeting is, I think this is a really great opportunity to hear from all of you. If there are things that you don't think are going in the right direction or that we need to address better, this is definitely the place to say so. And we would love to hear from all of you about, what we could be doing.
Thank you so much, Erin. We have a couple of, we are taking note of all the questions that are coming in the chat and in the question submission function. But I do also want to give a chance to hear from our public live who raised their hand. So we're going to be kind of jumping between these different topics. Let's hand it over to MH Bryman, if you'd like to unmute and share your question live.
MH Bryman, you can go ahead and give your comment now if you'd like. You have the ability to speak.
Okay, maybe MH Bryman stepped away.
Perhaps. Let's come back. I'll call on the next person, which would be Ryan Brunsing. Ryan, please feel free to go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for providing this forum for us to listen in and provide some feedback. I live in the downtown area, and looking at your priorities and goals that you've outlined, there's a couple of things that jumped out at me. One is that understandably there's a focus on affordable housing and figuring out ways to get people into homes. I understand that. But my concern is that the goal of sustainability and design focus is somewhat counter to the streamlining and simplifying and sort of almost sounding rushing the affordable housing approval process. And my experience, we just remodeled a part of our house, is that the City of Menlo Park's permitting process, wasn't as well staffed as I might have expected. Let me just say that. So that seems like a big shift in Menlo Park's capacity to actually execute on a lot of these permits and policies. And it's, I'm concerned that there's going to be pressure to sort of push aside the sustainability and design aspect of this due to the pressures of housing access. So can you guys comment on how the process of prioritizing each of these goals? And in my opinion, it would make more sense to build a system to get the permitting process in place, build design and sustainability regulations and rules prior to pushing towards fast tracking any sort of affordable housing, because the risk you're going to run into, at least in my opinion, is a groundswell of resistance if people start seeing designs that they don't support. So I really appreciate the effort you guys are putting into this. But that's that's my question to you is, how do you see those two things playing out? And do you think there's room to think about sustainability and design and building the infrastructure for this before actually implementing the affordable housing plans? Oh, and one other question, sorry, is there any stepwise approach you're going to take to the zoning changes? Because they're all along the downtown area, but seems like maybe there's opportunity to focus on like the parking and areas where there's big spaces where there isn't housing yet. But any thoughts on any of that? Thanks.
Excellent questions, Ryan.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks for the questions. There's a lot of questions in there, so I'm going to try to address as many as I can remember. In terms of the zoning, particularly in the downtown, one of the things that we're reviewing is removing the cap, and then also having implementing zoning that goes along with the housing element in terms of just the density requirements. In terms of the variety of standards that we are looking at, we are considering parking, we are considering height limits, FAR, and those are all of the things that we will be considering as part of the housing element policies, and then what we want to do with the zoning ordinance as well. What were some of your other questions?
Yeah, so specifically the potential for opposing goals, one being ensuring sustainability and design standards are set and met, and building out the infrastructure to actually implement something like that, which I think Menlo Park anyways, first to build affordable housing, which is understandable, and sort of how the stepwise implementation of those things to ensure you don't have a groundswell of resistance based on the designs that come out.
I'm sorry,
you were just muted, Ryan.
Broke up for a bit.
I'll shorten it.
Ryan, I
there
think
seems to be. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. If you think you understand, please feel free.
Yeah, great question, Ryan. You really put your finger on some of the tensions surrounding how cities have traditionally planned and processed housing, interact with a lot of the new state laws coming out of Sacramento, dictating a new reality for this whole process. And one of the tools that the city will need to develop to ensure sustainability and good design and meeting the city goals, like you mentioned, is something called objective standards, which provides a lot more clarity and guidance upfront to the community, the neighbors, people looking to build new housing. They know what the rules are, they're objective. The city can move faster in that type of environment to process projects that do meet the city's goals. And it's the right thing to do, but it's also state law now for a lot of cases that cities will have to be less dependent on discretionary, subjective standards and more reliant on objective standards that any two people could read the requirement and understand what it means and how it would be applied. And so I think that's what we're going to see here to kind of bridge that gap that you've identified.
Great, thanks.
Thank you so much, Ryan. We're going to quick check if MH Bryman returned, if you'd like to ask your question live, and if not, we can continue. I see you unmuting, but I cannot hear you.
Okay, well, let's move on to our next speaker in the interest of time, and we can always come back.
Great.
The next speaker will be Matthew Lopeman. Go ahead, Matthew.
Hi, thank you. Hey, thank you for taking my comment. I'm a neighbor in Suburban Park, and we've been notified of the intention to rezone the Ravenswood site next to Flint Park. I would welcome new neighbors. I agree that we should be bringing in affordable housing into the area. My concern is around the access, traffic, and safety related to single lanes on Hedge getting into that site. And I'd ask the committee to consider consulting the neighbors and thinking about if we're going to rezone, also rezone to provide access via Van Buren. Also, if we're going to assign, preference to Ravenswood school district workers, which I think is great, could we expand that to Menlo City School District, Los Alamitos, fire department, police. If we're going to have programmatic housing aimed at certain communities, I think essential workers and providers in our community are worthy of that. So thank you for that.
Thank you,
Thank you so much for that question. Just noting, I'm sharing the Miro board now to show how we're capturing all this feedback. But if someone else from the team would like to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. I see there's a lot of traffic in the chat in the Q&A about the former flood school site near Flood Park, adjacent to 101, as well as the neighborhood up there. The council authorized us to analyze a fairly large umbrella of sites that Asher talked about, the 4,000 units that could potentially come out of these sites identified on the map as shown on the screen here. And so the city is on track to analyze all these sites environmentally, but no final decisions have been made about which sites would ultimately be considered as opportunity housing sites and which would be included in the final draft of the housing element. So there's many touchstones along this process where folks who are concerned about any specific site can engage with this process through both the environmental impact report process. There'll be a public review of that document where people can comment and raise issues around any environmental topic from noise to aesthetics, cultural resources, biology, traffic concerns, impacts on public facilities, including schools, public safety services. And so the Planning Commission, the Housing Commission, and the Council will have the full benefit of all that analysis, including a public engagement. So I don't want anyone to feel like because they're seeing something on a map that everything's been settled. There's plenty of opportunities to engage with this process on site, and ultimately the council will have the discretion to make the final determination of which sites would be in the final document. But you're definitely welcome. This meeting is really focused on policies and programs for the housing element. But since you decided to spend part of your Saturday morning with us, we definitely want to hear concerns that you may have that brought you to this meeting. Deanna, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And just to add on to that, so I think folks are aware that the site is owned by the Ravenswood City School District. They had conducted an RFP for potential use of that land. The school district has the board has identified a potential developer to partner with. So there is an idea for a development. The city has not received any specific development proposal. That being said, most recently at our city council meeting on Tuesday, the city council directed the project team here to focus on some additional outreach. So we will be reaching back out to the Suburban Park neighborhood to discuss projects or sites where there could be potential projects. So where property owners have expressed interest and where there could be potential development that could be reviewed concurrently as part of the or it would be separate from the housing element, but where there might be rezonings on sites as part of the housing element process. So please note for the folks out in Suburban Park, there was direction from the city council at Tuesday's meeting to provide an additional engagement. So we will be conducting that as well. So there will be another opportunity to provide your feedback.
Thank you so much for your questions and replies. And before we go on to our next speaker, I wanted to bring up a question that was brought up in the chat earlier that relates to some of these issues as well. And again, is zooming out. Karen Bradshaw asks, how are you planning on supporting our Menlo Park schools with an additional 4,000 units? So considering these changes in population, would anyone from the team like to answer Karen's question?
Deanna, do you want to take the question about the schools?
Thanks. So that is a good question. I know the project team has met a few times now with the Menlo Park City School District. They have been involved. We also met with the other school districts serving Menlo Park. So the Sequoia Union High School District, Ravenswood School District, Las Alamitas School District. There is a small portion and that also is being served by Redwood City School District. So it's a good question. So it's an ongoing conversation that we'll continue to have as part of this process.
Great, thank you so much, Deanna. And let's move to our next speaker with their hand up. I have Rika at the top of my list.
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with everyone today. I am another neighbor in Suburban Park as well. And a couple concerns that I have just, reviewing this proposal, similar to what Karen Bradshaw had just brought up, the concern over the additional capacity in population, the additional increase in population and how that's going to impact, student to teacher ratios within our local schools. Specific to the James Flood location, I feel like that location would be better served as a school, which is what it was originally intended for, versus 100+ unit development that may be deemed as part of an affordable housing development. However, the term affordability, that's such a liquid, fluid term that changes overnight. I feel like it's difficult to define, it's difficult to quantify, and that site specifically adding such a large complex into our neighborhood will permanently impact the safety and desirability of the suburban park neighborhood, which we have lots of families with kids, running around playing outside. And, I feel like there are other uses for that spot specifically that would be more impactful for the community. I will be joining the secondary meeting, but affordability as a term for these developments specifically needs to be quantified, I feel like, because it is such a loosely used term that it's difficult to have any real impact, I want to say, with regards to a lot of these developments. So if you could provide some more clarity on that specifically and how the social justice pillar is coming into play with these developments as well.
Thank you so much, Rick.
I'll call on the next speaker, Adina Levin.
Or do we want to respond to this question, anyone from the team, or before we move on to our next speaker?
I was going to say, I was going to ask Aaron if we have a slide that shows the affordability categories. I would push back a little bit on Rika's concern about affordability being an ill-defined concept. It's it's very highly regulated even by the state and local and federal governments. And there are very distinct categories of affordability. So that may be part of the confusion. You really can think of it as an affordability range from a very small percentage of area median income, which is sort of a benchmark for how the affordability categories are developed across the state. And these are all based on published documented numbers of what the average, or not the average, what the median income is in every county in the state of California. And those are published by the State Department of Housing and Community Development. And then that median is then further broken down into different categories, just purely mathematically based on percentages that are encoded in state law. And so when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about housing that is by definition affordable to people making between 0% of the median income, which would be $0 per year, up to 120% of median income. But the great majority of affordable housing that is focused on by housing programs and nonprofit housing providers and developers is really between 0 and 80% of area median income. So it's a good point of discussion, and we could maybe later in this meeting we could pull up some resources to help explain that better. Thank you for the comments, Rika.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's continue on to our next speaker, Adina, if you'd like to unmute.
Hi, yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. So my name is Adina Levin, and I do serve on the Menlo Park Complete Streets Commission. So my first comment is going to be not speaking for the Complete Streets Commission, but reporting on things relating to that. And then I'll move on to making comments just purely as an individual. So with regard to the circulation issues for the Flood Park site in particular, the City Council has generally asked Complete Streets Commission to review circulation topics relating to significant new developments. I think that there are circulation issues with those sites that need to be looked at and addressed. And the Complete Streets Commission has, multiple times said, being interested to review such, potential solutions for the issues. I want to move on to some more comments. One item that I didn't see, was there a principle on, I guess there was some material on protecting tenants, and I have some additional comments relating to that. There were some sites that are the R3, moderately dense apartment buildings near downtown that were noticed as sites. And, those have people, living in them who, are non-high income likely. And it would be good to have policies that would protect against displacement, including, and these are some suggestions that I've got from colleagues from people in other cities, where if you increase the density, you can accommodate people who were previously living there and enable them to come back and live in those apartment buildings, and also be able to accommodate new people. Another comment relating to protecting tenants, there was a rental registry that was mentioned as it may relate to rent stabilization type policies, but there are other reasons to have a rental registry. There are some new laws that enable the creation of duplexes, but those can't be used in buildings that have been rented out. But Menlo Park has no rental registry, so we as a city have no idea if there is a building that is proposed to be made into a duplex that somebody is actually living in. So having a rental registry would be a helpful strategy to make sure that there aren't duplexes made from houses that are being rented out to people, which would be in violation of law, but we wouldn't know it. Let's see, in terms of the outreach for the development site proposed for housing for people who work in schools, and I think having outreach to the people that live near the site is good, and also having outreach to people that would potentially benefit from the housing and who may have, face long and difficult commutes. So I think that would be a useful outreach also. Let's see, and then another comment that I had with regard to the car parking and having a parking that is lower in places that have good walking and transit access, I think is good. And then along with that, having policies to support people using non-driving travel. So for example, there is the region is starting to do a pilot program to have transit passes for all transit agencies, so that you could have a transit pass and use it for Caltrain or the Transbay bus. And providing that to people who are residents would help people be able to have fewer cars if they do not need them. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adina. You gave a lot of important comment on various aspects of the city. So I'd like to see if anyone from the team would like to reply, and kind of just zooming out a little bit. We do want to focus on the policies that were being shared in this, in what the work that has been done so far on the housing element. So just to see if we can also lift some of those questions up. But would anyone like to reply to Adina?
Okay. I would let her comments stand, David. I think she made some good observations and statements and touched on several issues that we're looking at. We only have 50 more minutes for this meeting. So if at this point we could really ask the group, the participants who've taken the time today to spend with us, there'll be additional opportunities for public comment at the end of the meeting and general questions and answers. But at this point, if we could really focus on giving us some focused input on these goals and policies you see on the whiteboard on your screen. That would really help us for where we are in this process, with the promise that there'll be additional touch points for focused discussions on individual sites. Maybe David, you or Aaron could prompt some questions or statements that people could respond to.
We actually have quite a few raised hands, so I was actually thinking maybe we should start going through them because I know people have had their hands up for a while now.
And if we could maybe ask speakers to limit their comments for a minute or two, that'll make sure everyone has a chance to speak.
Great. Thank you. And with those points in mind, we'll switch over to Philip B. If you'd like to unmute and share a question.
Unmuted. I have three comments or two comments and one question. One, and I would like you to entertain the idea of deleting the word equity, equitable, equitably. It sort of distracts from the real purpose and intention of what we're trying to do here. And that is to have affordable housing for people that need it, law enforcement, children of my children, and we've lived here over 31 years. And so this word has become very political. So I would just suggest removing it, and it wasn't needed before, so why has it been added? The second comment is on the area called the Camino Real, downtown specific area. And I don't know why you would entertain the idea of increasing the density of that at this time, since we've already have all these projects under construction. And since we have them under construction, we don't even know what the traffic impact of it. And originally we were sold this idea that there would be like 2 stories next to the street in some areas, and then anything over it would be set back. And so that we could retain the history and character of Menlo Park. And it seems like we're going the wrong direction in terms of keeping the culture and character of Menlo Park. And I'm not a person that wants to just freeze us in time. I'm a person that wants us to keep growing and morphing over time as a city. The third thing is the R3. And we have a property in the R3, and it's like maybe a duplex and 5,000 square feet. So I think I would either want to hear your detail on what R3 means, or if you can't, the question would be, who should I contact with the city so that I could actually meet with them and have an informed discussion, detailed discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip.
For a follow-up discussion, Philip, I would contact Deanna, who you've seen on the meeting this morning. You can contact her through the city website. If you navigate to the planning department, and she's identified as the deputy director of the community development department, and you can email her or phone call her from there. In terms of equity, I would really encourage you to think of that as a word that denotes fairness and treating all people equally, and having fair opportunities for housing in this situation we're discussing today. It is really a big part of what we're trying to do, and it really does tie into the city's goals to provide housing at different income levels, as you identified. Affordable housing, critically important, but it needs to be done in a way that people have access to all the other amenities and opportunities the city has to offer, which has very many implications of how, where, when, why that housing would be built. But you will see a strong commitment to that through this entire effort.
Thank you, Jeff. And again, we want to emphasize that we have 14 hands up and our time is running short. So if we can focus our comments a little bit more succinctly and really ask some questions that will clarify or spark more discussion. And let's continue with Nicole.
Hi, thank you. I was actually just trying to type everything out in the chat. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak. So I wanted to comment on the goals that you identified. I want to try to keep it to the policies that you requested. And my concern is that there's various goals that appear to be in conflict with one another. In particular, there's this goal to create affordable housing, which I don't think anybody would disagree is an important goal and something we should focus on. But increasing density of particular areas to essentially max out the capability to build affordable housing seems to be in conflict with goal H2 of equitably maintaining, protecting, and enhancing existing housing in neighborhoods. So I'd like to understand, how the committee is weighing the goals, considering those factors, and ensuring that the existing homes and communities are not negatively, detrimentally impacted by, packing as many people as possible into existing neighborhoods. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the second part of my question, which is goal H7, which is to essentially make it easier for developers to build, streamlining the processes. My understanding is that would essentially negate the need for them to abide by CEQA, to undergo traffic studies, to undergo environmental studies, things of that nature. And so if that happens, again, I think that's in conflict with goal H2 of ensuring that existing homes and neighborhoods are protected. So I'd like to understand if there's more kind of due diligence from the city happening at the front end with respect to assessing traffic, assessing whether the affordable housing sites are appropriate, like if there's transit nearby, if there's utilities nearby, things of that nature. How much due diligence is happening at the outset before the zoning is changed and before you kind of end up in this streamlined processes where it's outside of the city's hands to ensure that all the goals are accomplished?
Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you.
Those are great questions and concerns, and you've really hit on the thing in planning that we're constantly wrestling with is how to address competing priorities and competing goals. As you've noticed, they can be in tension with each other, and that's not a bad thing. It's just a matter of finding the right balance between different goals. All of which point to things the city desires to accomplish and the community would normally support. So for example, how do we accommodate increased densities without unfairly or unnecessarily impacting existing neighborhoods? And a big part of that analysis for specifically the traffic you mentioned will take place within the environmental impact report, which will be a part of this public process. And you will see very detailed analysis of traffic, air quality, noise, all the major issues that the city needs to consider. And so based on that, the city will develop policies and development regulations that find that balance between providing additional housing, but also having objective standards around setbacks, building mass, building heights that can provide for logical and normal good transitions between different types of development, which Menlo Park obviously has a wide variety of situations that need to be considered, and the plan will do everything it can to make sure that happens. And thank you for your 2-minute comment.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Before we go to our next speaker, there is one theme that's coming out a lot in the chat and in some of the questions that are coming through, which is on our current context and the current public health crisis that continues to transform the COVID, it's constantly changing. So how do we plan a housing element considering where we are now and the greater relevance of public health? Anyone like to answer that, how it relates to all of the goals?
Yeah, boy, that's a tough one. In my mind, the ongoing COVID pandemic has just pointed to how important it is to have good, stable housing. If you can't go to your work because of shelter-in-place requirements, well, hey, the importance of shelter just went way up. You're spending way more time at home. People need a secure, safe environment, not only to live, but to work now in some cases. And so it's really just made this work more and more critical. From a technical, official, legal point of view, nothing's changed, right? The city has a mandate from the state to plan for 3,300 new units, and the city is in the middle of that process. But I get the question, and I understand that the world is changing, and we need to be open to how that could influence how we respond to that mandate.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And let's continue with Victoria Kelly, if you'd like to unmute and share a question.
Hi, yes, thanks for taking my call. I guess my question is about rezoning, specifically what types of lots are looking at being rezoned. I know some of the commercial zones are being considered for rezoning, but I'm curious as to how many of these are actually zoned for single family homes, because I think that does change the neighborhood a lot more than using something that's already on an existing major street. And so I'm curious about the percentage of the lots that are currently R1 zoned.
In terms of the opportunity sites,
yes,
what we did was we did a filter of 1/2 acre to 10 acres because HCD said those are the most appropriate for affordable housing. And so anything under 1/2 acre, we haven't really put in as an opportunity site. I think there's a couple here and there that might be commercial sites. And so those are not, we're not relying on those particular sites for in terms of our housing strategy. We are looking at the R3, but I think we're taking off the 10,000 square foot limitation. And so there are some of those that we have mapped. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, no, I guess in particular, the 37, the flood site, that's an R1U zoned lot. So I guess my concern is, are we going to start rezoning R1? And developers obviously are incentivized to maximize the number of units on any given lot. So how are we going to handle that precedent?
The short answer, Victoria, is lots or parcels with existing single family homes on them are not great housing sites for intensification from a strictly from a housing element perspective because of the size, like Sung talked about, because by definition, each site in most cases has a different owner, which is considered an obstacle to redevelopment, even if a city did want to collect a whole bunch of single family parcels and try to do an apartment building, for example. Having said that, there is the new law I'm sure a lot of you have heard about called SB 9 that takes the city out of the equation to a large degree. And the state tells you as a homeowner, you can subdivide your property. You can build 2 houses on each lot. And so that's a big change. And this housing element isn't leaning into that very much at all, just because it's so new and there's really very little ability to predict to what degree that will be taken up. But that is out there as something that is new and different and a pretty significant change from the past.
Thank you so much for that exchange. And we're going to continue with our next person with their hand raised. We have Catherine.
Yes, hi, thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there are a lot of goals. I guess having come from business background, I think having too many goals, it's prioritization is going to be important. I'm just wondering, I guess, what the process will be for prioritizing the goals. So that's a question, I guess. Do you have another question? Is there a model, a successful model that other cities, other countries have used? Because this isn't unique to Menlo Park or to California or the US. The population is growing everywhere, and finding ways to deal with it and to take concerns into account, and yet come up with, without getting paralyzed by the conflicting priorities of, say, someone who's looking for affordable housing and someone who wants their housing value protected, or their character of their neighborhood to not change. So we're looking for, like, is there a model that you guys are using? Some feedback on the communication. More visuals might help, and examples. I think taking one concern I'm having about people reacting to the number of units. I'm guessing this is all happening over time. If you think about 4,000 units, people freak. But what about, this isn't all going to happen at once. This is a slow process, even if it's speeded up. So maybe more visuals. I know you have some graphics and things, but maybe some more renditions of what things might look like. For I have to say, on the front of the housing element update, there's the photo. The photos are good. It's nice to have photos. I think.
Catherine, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to
okay.
I think we got some really good feedback, and I want to hit your big questions. Any last little point just to wrap up?
Sure. Rental registry. I think I would love to see that happen at the state level, and take some of the pressure off the city by city. Because I do think it's a great idea. I think landlords will probably be opposed to it, but you could do it by renter driven. I'm a renter, and I'd be happy to share my rental information in order to ensure that there's a record of a fair registry of what housing is costing around here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Would anyone on the team like to weigh a little bit on the kind of the implementation priorities?
David, due to the time constraints and the overwhelming public interest, let's go ahead and move through the comments, and maybe we can try to respond to some of the highlighted issues after everyone's had a chance to speak.
Excellent. So go through our raised hands and then reply as a whole. Okay.
Yeah, I'll take notes.
Thank you so much. Let's continue with Ross then.
Thank you so much, everyone. And first and foremost, just want to say how grateful I am to everybody on the committee, all of the stakeholders who are being so thoughtful and diligent in building out this plan to continue to evolve and improve Menlo Park. I think I would imagine I speak for a number of people on this call that while there are some concerns with increasing the number of housing units and the density, that overall this is going to benefit a number of people. This will improve quality of life for most residents, and especially those who need it most. I want to apologize. I've lit up the whiteboard with all of these dark green sticky notes. So a lot of my comments are directly on the whiteboard on every single goal. The main question that I wanted to ask here live is just given I would say the dire need for additional housing throughout the Bay Area, what are the largest challenges, obstacles, or blockers that are getting in the committee and the city's way to getting this project pushed forward? Or in other words, how can those of us on this call who are very supportive help support an expedient revitalization of the city? How can we help move it quickly?
Thank you so much, Ron. And we're going to continue on, and we're noted down that great proposal of how to get involved. Let's continue with Carolyn. Okay, Carolyn, we'll come back to you. Cynthia.
Hi, I think you can hear me. This is Cynthia
Yes,
Harris.
welcome.
I'm a resident of Linfield Oaks. I'm also on the Planning Commission, but I'm going to speak for myself. I just want to appreciate all of the work and thinking that's gone into these goals. Both, I know you've taken a look at the past goals but kind of added to them and made them more relevant to today, and also the additional new goals for this housing element. I had a couple of comments. For the sustainability goal, I think adding a goal of making it easier to create infill housing would be helpful. I think we've all learned that, or we will learn that infill housing is much better for our climate as we move forward in increasing our housing. For goal number 1, encouraging and increasing staffing to ensure that we're successful for all of our goals, I think is great. If we move faster to increase our overall housing stock and meet our state requirement, we're going to really need to increase our staffing. So my question is, how will you determine what is going to be needed and how this will be accomplished? Or will that be part of what you're putting together? Are you going to put together a staffing plan as part of this process? I do have an overall concern, and maybe we're going to get to this later, but I love all the goals, but would like to see a connection of these goals to the sites selected. I'm excited to see that you've reached out to both affordable and market rate developers to get their thoughts, but I'm wondering when you'll be working with the owners of these properties that have been developed to ensure that there is substantial evidence that they would be interested in redeveloping their properties into new housing. Okay, thank you. Thanks again. It's a lot of great work has gone into this. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And let's continue with one more chance to Carolyn, if you're still there.
Yes.
Welcome.
We just wanted to put out there that if any discussions about the flood school site and access to it, whether it's via hedge or via Van Buren, that the flood triangle neighborhood needs to be considered, because all of us that live in flood triangle neighborhood have Van Buren running along us. So we just want to make sure that we're in any discussions about the development of the flood school site.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carolyn. And so it's not as overwhelming to respond to all comments. How about we take a pause to respond to the speakers that we've heard so far? Anyone from staff?
Thanks, David. Going back to Catherine, she's concerned we may have too many goals or it might be hard to prioritize them all. I'll let that comment stand. It is a challenge. In terms of models that we're looking at, we'd like to note that the city has actually already met all of its market rate housing required for this planning period due to the significant amount of development that was planned, approved, and built in the Bayfront neighborhood, District 1 near Bellhaven. And so that leads us to focus very strongly on affordable housing located in high opportunity sites throughout the rest of the city. And this brings us back to the equitable equation and affirmatively furthering fair housing. And so that's really that's really our model in a nutshell, is to really lean into the nonprofit affordable housing sector and partner with them to make this a reality. That was Catherine. Ross mentioned a question about what are the largest obstacles to get this housing plan to the finish line, and how can supportive people help with that. And quite frankly, doing what you're doing this morning is everything we could ask for, to be involved in this process as many touch points as possible shows the city what the community is thinking, and helps them make the best decisions possible. So just stay involved, stay connected to this process, and that is really what we ask for people who are 100% behind this effort, people who have some concerns. Everyone and anyone anywhere along that spectrum is needed to make this work. Carolyn mentioned the flood school site and the need to maintain community outreach, engagement, and communication with the flood triangle neighborhood. That will definitely be happening. As Deanna mentioned, the council has directed that as well. Cynthia Harris, a member of the Planning Commission, mentioned the sustainability goal and having some specificity around encouraging, improving the ability to do infill housing. In terms of staffing, the details of that will really be left up to the city council and the city administration in terms of the budgeting process, the goal setting process, separately from the housing element in terms of budgets and resources and staffing required to get the job done. But the housing element will definitely highlight it as an important driver to make this successful.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And just a note, we know you might have seen the URL of the mural board, and while we love that you're in the mural board and really excited about contributing, it is a little bit confusing for our recorders. So please note that we are going to capture everything that we get in the chat. So whatever you would like to put in the mural board, if you can just put it directly in the chat, we'll make sure to capture it. It just helps our process a little bit. Thank you so much for that. And we're going to continue on. We'll take a couple of questions and then pause again. We do have 20 minutes and we want to respect the time and make sure that you all can continue with your weekend. So let's continue, again, being a little more succinct to give everyone, all 9 hands, a chance to share. Jeff, any? Okay.
No, I'm done. Thanks.
Okay. Let's go with Francesca.
Hi, my name's Francesca Segre, and I just want thanks for all this hard work. What a huge lift. And I just wrote this in the chat, but for those who may not be able to see it, I just want to say that I do welcome the density in Menlo Park. I think it's going to be, bring more diversity, which is going to bring more vibrancy. So I think that's great. I think on the sustainability goal, which is my, would be number one for me, is I think we can't afford to not require that every single new building be as sustainable as possible, because none of these other goals matter at all if we're not in an environment where the air is clean and that the water is potable and that, that there's a future here. So I would really say, make sure that any developer has to comply with the most sustainable options that technology has for us right now. The second element is that I am a member of the school board, but speaking for myself today, clearly this is going to create an impact on the schools. This is not news to you. I would love for you to, the city, M Group, whatever, calculate, come up with dollar figures of understanding of what this new housing, how that's going to impact the schools. And please, continue to work with us and come up with ideas of how we're going to pay for these impacts. I welcome new people, but we got to be able to maintain the quality and where's the funding coming from. And my third
point, I think, is related to transportation, and that, that moves into sustainability and pressure on the schools and all of that. I would like to see the city council and the city come up with more innovative ways to improve the usability and the attractiveness of our buses. And I'm just spitballing some ideas here, but I would love to see, I just would love to hear some of these ideas, like, an incentive to try the bus. There's a free boba at the other end, and maybe people would try it if they could get that. Or maybe there are signs on the bus stops that say the next bus is coming in 7 minutes, so people have a reason to go. Or there's a sign on the back of the bus so that the drivers can see, oh, you're stuck in traffic, but here's the route of the bus in front of you that, might have done the job for you. So I would just love to see some more innovation. I mean, if we're going to have more people, we're going to need to see fewer empty buses and more people taking these alternate routes. So I just want to see some innovation, not just compliance. So that's it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Francesca. And we'll continue on with Karen and followed by Annie.
Hi, thank you. I'm Karen Grove, and I'm a member of the Housing Commission in Menlo Park, but I'm speaking just for myself. I just want to say thank you for all the work you put in. And I want to say yes to housing for people of all incomes and all abilities. So all abilities would be that one of those special needs populations you mentioned. I've learned recently that people with special needs often pay 30% more for their housing than people who don't have a disability. And they are also predominantly, many are living on Social Security income, which is less than $1,000 a month. So that is definitely a very high need population that we should focus on. The number one contribution to homelessness is lack of affordable housing. So we really need to focus. So we need all affordability, but we really need to focus on the very low income affordability needs. I really agree with increasing staffing, examining and overcoming barriers such as parking requirements that are excessive. And I echo that we need to raise funds for subsidized affordable housing for sure. And finally, it's easiest to keep people housed than to, we also need to keep people housed. So the tenant protections that have been mentioned, I support, as well as emergency assistance to help people overcome tough spots and stay housed. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Yeah, can I add one more thing? I just wanted to lift up who is not on this call. I think it's really important to know that mostly people have a connection to Menlo Park already. There are a whole bunch of people who live an hour or 2 hour drive from Menlo Park, but are crucial elements of our community as workers. And they're not on this call, most likely. So let's just keep their voice in our heads. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. Annie.
Hi. Hi, sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So I just had a pretty general question regarding all of the opportunity sites. When you're considering these opportunity sites for affordable housing, which as I understand in almost all cases then kicks in a density bonus, meaning these developers can max out the property and put in, more houses than the city has no say anymore. Density bonus kicks in. So then also what kicks in is fewer parking requirements. So the developers, it's kind of a double whammy. They can put more units in with even fewer, less parking. And with affordable housing specifically, I would imagine a lot of those people don't have cars or ways to get around very easily. So I'm wondering, when you're looking at this affordable housing, are you considering walkability to schools, public transportation, nearby grocery stores, walkability to just in general to get yourself anywhere? How much does that weigh in or factor in to prioritize a project on a specific opportunity site over one that perhaps does not have those things going for it?
Thank you so much, Annie. And let's take a pause and see if we want to offer any quick comments to any of the questions that we've heard so far.
Sure, David, I'll take a shot at that. So starting with Francesca's comments and questions. She requested that the city calculate a dollar figure for how this housing plan would affect the school districts. And at the very beginning of this process, back in May of last year, the city council did authorize the preparation of a very detailed fiscal impact analysis, which is not required by the state, but the city saw the value of doing that and the importance of that. That will do exactly what you said. It'll look at the cost implications to the different school districts of this much new housing coming with that number of new students coming. Karen Grove, a member of the Housing Commission. Oh, I guess I was talking too long. Pay for housing. She made some very good points about homelessness being tied to lack of affordable housing. We agree with that 100%. Supports more staff. Folks who are not here. Absolutely, the housing plan is meant to serve existing and future residents who by definition are typically the folks who don't already live here are not represented, but a lot of this new housing is to serve a demand for folks who do important jobs and have long commutes. Annie talked about the opportunity sites. She's absolutely correct about the state density bonus laws. That does kick in higher density, less parking, and some other changes. I will point out that if we want less traffic, we need less parking, and that's a proven fact. And I know no one likes to see too many cars on their street, in their neighborhood, parking on the street. But there's a direct correlation between the amount of parking provided in all types of development and the amount of driving that goes along with that. And the scoring for the sites was very much influenced by the location of the sites. Is quite frankly the most important factor. So issues around walkability and proximities to schools, open space, services, food stores, those were actually requirements that we have to demonstrate that the sites are meeting. So sorry for the rush, but I want to talk less and want to hear from you guys.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jeff. And I'm going to ask our last 8 participants with their hand raised, if you could please keep your comments to as brief as possible. If someone's already mentioned the priority that you want to second, just say second, or just note that we're collecting everything. So let's continue with Ken, Brittany, and Angela. So first, Ken.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Hi, my name is Ken Chan, and I'm an organizer with the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County. We work with our communities and their leaders to produce and preserve quality affordable homes. First and foremost, I'd like to thank staff from Menlo Park and everyone from M Group for all your hard work and effort in setting up today's meeting and making yourselves available to present and receive input from all of us and the community today. On behalf of HLC, I'd like to say that the city should perform both an assessment of fair housing to make sure that it's affirmatively furthering fair housing and a needs assessment before compiling and deciding on a list of sites. This allows for the identification of specific barriers to housing and for the city to properly determine if they can be addressed. It'd be a much better use of staff time and resources to ensure that this once in an 8-year process is performed correctly the first time around. If our State Department of Housing and Community Development rejects the submitted housing element, it could potentially delay the approval of a certified housing element by months or even a year. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ken. Brittany.
Hello, thanks for all your work on this today. I wanted to really emphasize a lot of the policies that are here as fantastic, especially goal H4. Really like the focus on the affordable housing overlay so that we get the most units out of any site that does have the chance to redevelop. Also the parking requirements, I think that would be great to kind of have some flexibility there and think about, do we truly need so much parking at all of these sites? Like Jeff just mentioned, I think there kind of is a shift in terms of how we can have people move throughout our community. It's a pretty small city. And so I think to the extent that we can focus on walkability and bikeability, that's fantastic. I live sort of downtown adjacent, and I'm super excited for the Spring Line project. I think it'll be great to be able to walk to a market or a couple great restaurants or coffee shops over there. And I think that's a great example of a project where we can really shift how we move throughout the community. I don't have to get in my car and drive somewhere far. I can take a walk or take a bike. Also wanted to second the point on tenant protections. Keeping people housed is a fantastic way to ensure that our community can retain a little bit of the completeness that we have. Like Karen mentioned, there are a lot of people who work here and help our city run, help us have such a great quality of life that we enjoy. And I think it's really crucial to make sure that we think about that workforce housing and essential worker housing as well. Finally, in terms of the sites that are up for consideration, I know a lot of them are in commercial areas. A lot of them currently are used as things like venture capital offices or Robinhood's headquarters. Those are big sites with a big potential to really add to that number that we need, the 4,000 units. I know there's been a discussion of, do we develop commercial sites? Do we develop single family areas? To the extent that those commercial sites can redevelop, I think they have a lot of potential. And wanted to echo an earlier comment as well that it would be great to see more evidence in terms of how likely those sites are to turn over. How likely is it that Robinhood would vacate their headquarters or venture capital firms might move out and have the sites redeveloped as affordable housing? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brittany. Angela.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Welcome.
Thank you. Guys, all very nice, warm and fuzzy. I think this is a terrible idea. Having additional density of population, to me, is going to increase crime, and where we're seeing a lot of crime coming up in the last year or two because of COVID. So my question is, how do you plan to keep crime at least no higher than current levels and preferably below current levels?
Thank you so much for that comment, Angela. And we're going to pause there and see if we'd like to respond to any of the
let's keep going with the speakers, David, and I'll try to wrap up at the end for anyone who wants to hear it.
Thank you, Jeff. And we'll continue with Eric.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Welcome. Yep. Yes, we can
Hi,
hear
Eric.
you.
Hi there, my name is Eric Burmeister. I'm the superintendent of Menlo Park City School District, which will encompass most of the housing that you all are proposing today. I want to thank you all. I'm also a resident and homeowner in Menlo Park. I'd like to thank you all for your hard work. I know that this is challenging, and I do believe that the process is progressing nicely, so kudos to all of you. Today's presentation and content feels a little to me as operating in a vacuum, and maybe that is necessary at this phase. But I do think it's important to signpost that it does appear to be operating in a vacuum. And the problem we all know with operating in a vacuum is the danger of not addressing the downriver impacts of all of the housing that you're talking about in this vacuum. We talk way more about the parking that housing will generate than we do about the students, and that seems misprioritized to me. I appreciated that the staff and M Group have met with us once. However, staff meeting with district does not mean that district concerns or needs are being addressed. We are not there yet, but I am hopeful and believe everyone involved has the best interest of schools when completing this project. Remember, Menlo Park City School District is a strong supporter of increased housing. We are so excited to serve the kids that these 4,000 units will generate, particularly the needs of the low-income families that currently have limited access to our amazing schools. But we do not have the facility space or the land space available to serve these kids, unlike our neighboring districts in Redwood City, Los Lomitas, and Ravenswood. Until we see the issues addressed in the goals, reports, and plans, the Menlo Park City School District electeds, families, and staff will continue to be a necessarily vocal canary in the coal mine to the city's planning. So I'd like to end with a question, and to some degree this has been answered today, which I'm encouraged, but I still have yet to see any of it, is beyond the EIR, can and will the housing element address in writing specific plans or even just hopes to address the land, facility, and financial needs of the school district? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. Very important issues. Continuing on with Alex, followed by Jenny.
Hi, I'm Alex Balsamo. My concern actually is similar to the prior speaker, but it relates to the impact on our business district. The downtown's becoming congested again. It's hard to get around in Park. So my question is, if we're going to make all of the surrounding blocks high density housing, is there an intention to rezone those areas to support some light commercial? That way people can just walk around the corner to have lunch or meet for coffee, rather than walking or driving several blocks to Santa Cruz Avenue, where they'll add to the congestion of our shopping district. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Jenny, followed by Nicole.
Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Perfect. So I'm so grateful that Francesca and Eric Burmeister are here, because my question is around, when did City Hall rezone from school to residential for that James Flood School location? Because I have not been part of that. I'm curious to know when that conversation happened. I'm very concerned about the due process and other constitutional rights of this neighborhood to have a say and understand why why we are losing school zoning in a city where we don't have the capacity for these new students, let alone the students that are there today. Last night at the board meeting, for those of you who attended, we have to start including a transitional kindergarten class. Where are those students going to go? So my question specifically is, can we break out that rezoning issue on that particular piece of land? Because there are legitimate concerns to be addressed. There are interests in more school zoning, and I'd like to understand that as separate from this housing element. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. And our last hand raised, but certainly not least, Nicole. Nicole, would you like to unmute? Okay, well, we are going to stop there, and I know we have one last hand up, Deb Martin, and then we'll end with that. Deb.
Okay, sorry about that. I thought my hand was raised the whole time.
Oh.
Yeah. No, I'm first of all, thank you for this session today. Very informative. I am a resident of Suburban Park. I'm glad that you guys will be holding separate sessions on that. So my question is a little bit more broad. It kind of echoes on the operating in a vacuum question. And I'm just curious more about how the city of Menlo Park is looking more broadly at what other cities are doing to help inform the process when it comes to the housing element. And so, while I support more affordable housing in Menlo Park, this is a broad effort, right? It's a regional effort. So I would want to know that like the city of Menlo Park is, and their efforts are kind of in parallel to what some other cities are doing, so that we aren't necessarily kind of creating the scenario where Menlo Park's trying to solve this issue. Now we've got like a great place for developers to come, and like we are the sort of leadership city of affordable housing, and it's not really getting then spread out regionally. So I really want to see more broader analysis and how that informs this process. And I will say that any wording or notion of fast tracking, the word fast tracking for developers is going to be a huge issue for residents, especially those of us who have built homes here and have gone through very rigorous processes. It seems like quite a unfair situation for people who've gone through the pain of building here. And I really think you need to make sure in your lens that you're considering what other residents have had to comply with and go through, and not make developers have an upper edge without community involvement. So those are my two main comments.
Thank you so much, Deb. And we'll briefly respond. Thank you so much. I know we're over time, so thank you for sticking with us. And after we respond to the general comments that we've heard and questions, we'll go on to next steps. So pass it on to the team to respond.
Thanks, David. And I was going to respond based on my notes, but if Deanna or anyone else from the team wants to have some final comments, please do jump in. So I'm going back to Ken Chan's comments. I think we addressed all the commenters before Ken. Ken's with the Housing Leadership Council, and he identified AFFH, which is an acronym known as Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, which is both state and federal law. And so we will definitely be having a strong focus on that throughout the entire housing element process and deliverables, right up to the adoption of the final document. It's a key driver of this whole process. Brittany Baxter talked about some of the benefits of more flexible parking requirements, such as being able to walk and bike to more places more safely. Tenant protections were important to her. She wanted to see more evidence that some of these larger, well-established commercial enterprises on some of these sites would have any likelihood at all of redeveloping. That is an effort. However, sometimes you just cannot get definitive information in this category from property owners and businesses, as well as things can change over the 8-year planning period. And part of this is the reason why we have this 4,000 unit umbrella that we're studying for the EIR and the housing element. The actual number of housing units needed is much less than that, but we do have a healthy buffer for sites that may be dropped for whatever reason, for property owners who are not interested, or who may say they're interested now but then change their mind later. So because of the importance of not only demonstrating capacity within the housing element itself as a plan, the city is very committed to actually achieving the production of the actual housing. And there's good reason for that, obviously, because we're in a housing crisis, but the state laws now have teeth in them, and cities that don't meet their housing production goals face definite consequences. And so we are aiming to have enough housing production capacity to meet the targets. Angela said this is all warm and fuzzy and very nice, but it's a terrible idea because she's concerned about crime resulting from density. I believe that's a false statement. I don't believe there's a direct link between density and crime, but the EIR will be identifying public safety issues, public service capacity around policing and public safety, and identifying if the city would need to add more officers based on population, if that would trigger the need for new facilities that would trigger environmental review in and of themselves. So that topic will be covered in general, but all studies done of housing developments catering specifically to affordable households do not show a positive link between crime and housing. Eric Burmeister from the school district talked about this feeling a little bit like it was in a vacuum, talking about policies when we have serious concerns about some of the spin-off effects of housing. But his real question he brought to point was, will the housing element discuss the land resources needed to serve all these new students, and where's the money going to come from for that? The EIR itself will consider public resources, just like we talked about public safety being a public service. We'll also talk about school districts as a public service and how public facilities are impacted by this, and what some of the land requirements might be. And if that's enough to require a new school, what would be the environmental effects of that? Under the environmental framework, we have to be very comprehensive in how we look at the environmental effects and impacts of this project and this process. The money part, we talked about a little bit. There's a special study being done by a specialized financial consultant who does these types of studies for cities, counties, school districts to look at the fiscal part of that equation. and Alex talked about the downtown getting more congested. Would there be more commercial uses? I think the short answer there is any development downtown. We're focused on the housing part of that, obviously now, but that most likely would be in a mixed use format, where some of the ground floor would be devoted to commercial services that could maintain that pattern of commercial use and activity and retail services for both the people who live downtown and people who are coming downtown, because it is the retail core, service core of the community. Jenny asked about when did the flood school site get rezoned. The short answer is it hasn't been rezoned. It's being analyzed as part of this housing element as a possible rezone. And so there'll be a lot of discussion and debate about that, obviously, as this process goes forward. But that is not something that's happened in the past. That's something we're talking about possibly happening in the future. Nicole, I think, didn't make any comments. Deb Martin was our last speaker. More broadly, how are we looking at this within the regional context? What are the other cities doing? Are we the only people doing the right thing? The fact is, every city in the Bay Area is going through this right now on the exact same schedule. Menlo Park is unique to some degree within that context, is that it's in San Mateo County, and all the cities in San Mateo County and the county for a long time now, going over multiple housing element periods, have really worked together as a group to collect information, to compare notes, to compare policies, to hire consultants to go out and do research on best practices from around the country on housing issues. So Menlo Park is really nicely situated to not be in a situation where they're off doing something in the corner that no one understands and is unique. That really in a good place to do good housing planning in a way that is beneficial not just to the city, but makes sense within that regional context. Because we know, development community, if they see something in a city that's super weird, they can, they could take their project elsewhere. They could do go up El Camino Real and pick another city. So there has to be some regional connectedness to how the plan works and what makes sense and what is really achievable within the market we're in now and the housing situation we're in. In terms of fast tracking, I grimaced a little bit when I heard that. To the extent that the city has had a long process in the past and some homeowners had difficulties with it, that's actually a strong reason to try to improve that, not just for developers coming in with big projects, but also for homeowners who want to add an ADU, remodel their house. That's something that should be fixed, right, and improved. We shouldn't plan on inflicting that on the next person or the next project. And this is a common occurrence throughout the Bay Area. Planning processes can become burdensome and difficult. But the goal really for all levels of housing, including single-family homeowners who obviously have a part to play in this through all the new laws around SB 9, lot splits, ADUs, granny units, junior ADUs. Those procedures need to be simplified in and of themselves. But the larger projects under state law will also have potential for streamlined review. And I would encourage you not to think of it as a bad thing in and of itself if the city is able to build processes, policies, and standards and guidelines that can actually result in development that everyone feels good about. So Deanna, do you want to help us put the proper frame on this going forward and give us some closeout comments?
Great, thank you, Jeff, and especially thank you for everyone who is spending time with us today. I think it's an important conversation that we will continue to have. We are in wrapping up our housing element portion for for the time being in order to help prepare a draft document. So just sort of looking ahead, and I think on the screen here, we have our housing element webpage. So that is definitely a good resource. If you do not have that already bookmarked, please do. We will be posting our presentation and recording of this meeting here from this morning on our website. Likewise, our past presentations, City Council staff reports, Housing Commission, other events that we've conducted are all on the timeline section of our housing element webpage. That is a good resource to help get up to speed if this is your first time attending, and then we'll be also posting new information as it becomes available. So thank you again for being here, and we encourage you to stay involved. You'll also see city staff contact, so Tom Smith and Cal Chan of our team who are help leading this project. In addition to myself, I added my email address in the chat, and can add it again. So feel free, if you did not have a chance to provide a comment today because you wanted to think about it, thought of something different, new, please reach out to us as well. And so just a couple of other things to be looking for. So as we mentioned, we will be continuing our engagement along with for our housing element. So specifically, we'll be reaching out to the Suburban Park and Flood Triangle neighbors related to the flood school site and other potential sites that have housing associated with a potential housing opportunity site. So that is additional outreach that we'll be conducting. We'll be also at Tuesday's City Council meeting have been directed to seek a partnership with a community-based organization. So as we turn our work to the environmental justice element and safety element, we'll be looking to partner with a community-based organization to help lead some additional and strengthen our engagement around those two elements of our project. And then we'll be also preparing a draft document. So the input that you're providing here this morning, along with the other input from our surveys and other focus group meetings and community meetings, we've been taking this information and helping prepare a draft document, which will be out for public review in the early spring. So those are some of the next key milestones. We're also working on our environmental impact report that Jeff mentioned earlier, our fiscal impact analysis that Jeff also mentioned. So some of those are some of the technical studies that we will be doing as part of this work to help provide the public and decision makers a more comprehensive view of the project. So with that, I know we're a little bit over time, but again, thank you so much for being here with us, and please feel free to reach out if you have additional questions. So thank you, and have a wonderful weekend.